Okay, hi everybody. Just sorting out my camera. Now, excuse me today, my voice is a little bit. I've got a sore throat today. Must have picked up some kind of nasty virus over the weekend. Anyway, let me just check that everything's okay with the camera. Okay, it all looks good. So here are some grammar misconceptions for today. Some of these are very common. We'll start with never start a sentence with and or but. This is actually completely untrue. You can start a sentence with a conjunction, and you can start a sentence with because as well. I've heard lots of people say you can't start a sentence with because. It's not correct. Conjunctions are okay at the beginning. Please understand, I'm just writing quick notes in the middle here, so I haven't got at the beginning. I miss out some words sometimes. These are quick notes. So yeah, the myth is that you can't start a sentence with and or but. But that's not true. But that's not true. There we go, there's a sentence which starts with but. Conjunctions are okay at the beginning. I've got a couple of sentences here which are connected to this misconception, but not at all the same. But they are connected because this is a mistake which I see very often with and it's a mistake that I make, especially in conversation, but I'm aware that it's definitely a mistake. Look at this one, I will try and finish it later. That conjunction is incorrect there. It sounds like I will try and I will finish it later. I mean, it's putting them both with the will, and that's not what we mean here. What we mean is I will try to finish it later. So that's incorrect, that I will try and finish it later. I mean, really, it's unparalleled anyway. If you've watched any of my videos on parallelism, you'll understand that when you use and, A and B must be comparable. And so will try and finish. It's not parallel. You've got a modal verb and an infinitive, and you've just got an infinitive there. So it's not really parallel. I don't like it anyway. Please get rid of that. I will try to finish it later. And another odd thing which I do is I very often write and so. Now technically I don't think this is a mistake. I've tried to find out if I can use two coordinating conjunctions together. And when I think about it, yeah, I often see and yet or but yet. And so I think this is okay, but I don't like it. I would say, I was tired, so I went to bed. I just think that's neater. I don't think there's any reason to have two conjunctions here, but I've noticed that this comes up all the time in my writing and in my speech. And so I'm trying to get rid of it. Try listening to your voice and you will notice some very common mistakes that you make especially when you're speaking. So try listening to your voice, and that way you might be able to get rid of some of these strange habits which come into our language. But anyway, technically I don't think that's a mistake, but still I'm going to try to get rid of it because I don't like it. I think it's messy. I think it's all I mean is so I went to bed. Anyway, another myth is that double negatives are always incorrect. This is not true at all. It's certainly true that if you speak like this, and this is very common by the way, this one here, you don't know nothing. That's something that people will very often say in England, but it's bad grammar. And grammatically it should be you don't know anything, because two negatives become a positive, logically speaking. And so if you say you don't know nothing, it means you do know something. So this is possible. You don't know nothing is possible. It's just that most of the time you mean you don't know anything. But if, say, you're interrogating a suspect and the suspect claims not to know anything, you might say he doesn't know nothing, he knows something. Yeah, he doesn't know nothing at all, he knows something. So it is possible, but the way people use it in a slang way is most of the time, 99% of the time, wrong. And that's where this idea comes from, that double negatives are always incorrect. But actually they're not. And so I've given you an example here. Some of them are not being used entirely incorrectly. You've got a double negative here, and that's fine, that sentence. We very often see them with negative prefixes. Very often you'll see double negatives with negative prefixes. So I've got another one here. He is a man not unlike yourself. That's fine. That's good grammar. It sounds good, and it adds a subtle nuance of meaning that wouldn't be there if you just said, he is a man like you. Yeah? It's missing something when you say, he is a man not unlike yourself. And you could also say something like this. I wouldn't say that I didn't like it. Maybe somebody says, you didn't like that performance, did you? And you say, well, I wouldn't say that I didn't like it. That's fine. So double negatives are correct when they're used correctly, but they're not correct when they're used incorrectly. Although I can think of a context when that one would be correct. You don't know nothing. Okay, never put a preposition at the end of a sentence. I don't know where this one came from, and because what about phrasal verbs? Yeah, I told him to cheer up. Is that not a correct sentence? It sounds fine to me. He smokes too much. I told him to give up. That's fine, isn't it? Nothing wrong with it at all. And what about questions? He is the man who I saw you talking to. Yeah, sorry, that's not a question. Let me give you a question. Did you? I don't know. Let's think of a good one with a. Who do you live with? What are you thinking about? Yeah. Who are you talking to? All of these questions have prepositions at the end, and if you rearrange them to put them earlier, it sounds incredibly formal and not at all like we speak in everyday English. So you could say, about what are you thinking? To whom are you talking? To whom are you writing? You could say it like that, but that sounds ridiculously formal. I don't recommend speaking like that in your everyday use of English. I recommend that you put the preposition at the end of the question and say, what are you talking about? What are you thinking about? Who do you live with? And not with whom do you live. It sounds unbelievably formal. And there's a very famous sentence online. It's supposed to be from Winston Churchill, but I don't think that's actually correct. I think this actually goes back a long, long time. And it's this sentence which uses a phrasal verb. This is the sort of nonsense up with which I will not put. So it's using the phrasal verb put up with to mean tolerate. And this just sounds ridiculous. And obviously the person has gone to a great deal of trouble. He's gone to a great deal of effort. He's made a great deal of effort to put the prepositions earlier, and it just sounds ridiculous. It sounds like nonsense. So it's quite a funny sentence. This is a sort of nonsense up with which I will not put. Okay, another common myth: never split infinitives. This came around in the 19th century. Somebody said that we shouldn't split infinitives. A number of grammarians said that we shouldn't. But I hope to show you that in at least one sentence is impossible not to split the infinitive. And here, look at this sentence. I wanted to gradually improve. Obviously we're splitting the two plus infinitive, and that's what a split infinitive means, by the way, if anyone's wondering. It's when you put a word in the middle of the to plus infinitive. Now the problem is, if we change the position of gradually, it starts to change the meaning of the sentence. If we say gradually, I wanted to improve, gradually starts to modify the whole clause. Or if we say I wanted gradually to improve, it sounds like gradually modifies wanted. And so if we want gradually to modify improve, it really has to go right next to the verb that it modifies. And for this reason, some adverbs really feel like they need to split the infinitive. So I would say this is why we say to boldly go. It's a famous one from Star Trek, because they're talking about going bravely forward. So if the adverb needs to modify this verb, I think it really is best to split the infinitive. And here's an example where we've got two words splitting the to plus infinitive. And I can't see any other way of saying that. The number is expected to more than double next year. If we move this more than to a different position, it completely changes the meaning. And so it's really necessary to split infinitives sometimes. And when you check online, if you check Oxford or Merriam-Webster, they all say that although some people still prefer not to split infinitives, and so maybe it's best that you try and avoid it, in some situations it's unavoidable. So don't think that it's always wrong to split infinitives. It's not. Okay, number 5, Oxford commas are wrong. Well, the clue is in the name really, because we normally use Oxford and Cambridge as our grammatical judges. I mean, they choose which rules we follow and which rules we don't follow. Oxford say that they're okay. And so you might say immediately Oxford commas are obviously not wrong because Oxford University Press use them. However, in our school system, for some reason, I have no idea why, I like Oxford commas. In our school system, we say that Oxford commas shouldn't be used. And so teachers teach the children not to use Oxford commas. And what happens is the children then go and read a book by Oxford University Press or read a newspaper which likes Oxford commas, and then they discover that what they learnt at school is not being used in the books and in the newspapers. So I think that the schools really ought to stop doing this, if I'm honest, just because there are a number of books and publishing houses which do use Oxford commas, including Oxford, which is obviously a big publishing house. And for that reason, I think at the very least, teachers ought to tell the students, the pupils, that Oxford commas exist and that they can save a lot of confusion. For example, this is a very famous sentence. I've taken it from the internet. I've stolen it from someone else. I've put my hands up to that. But it's an interesting example because look at this. We invited the strippers, JFK and Stalin, or however you want to pronounce his name. Now, the problem with this sentence, you'll notice that it's not using an Oxford comma because an Oxford comma would go here before the and. Now, if you don't like Oxford commas, you obviously wouldn't use one here. And the problem is, it changes the meaning. It means that it's possible that you mean the strippers and JFK and Stalin, but it's possible to read this sentence differently and to read it as we invited the strippers. And then we've got an appositive phrase. If you're not sure what that is, try my lesson on appositive phrases. An appositive phrase which describes who the strippers were. So it's saying that JFK and Stalin were the strippers. We invited the strippers, who were JFK, yeah, that's John F. Kennedy, and Stalin. And so, of course, it completely changes the meaning. However, if you like Oxford commas, and you just put a comma there, it's really clear that you mean the strippers and JFK and Stalin. So please see the logic anyway in using Oxford commas. If you don't like them, you might suggest that you could rearrange the list to make it clearer, and perhaps that's correct. But personally, I think just using Oxford commas clears up a whole lot of mess there. So that's the only example I've got there for that one. Let's come on to another one. Whose can't refer to things. I think this is quite common. People often think that whose is only for people. Obviously with who in it, it does sound like it's only for people, but it's not. I found this in Oxford. A willow tree whose branches reached right to the ground. So we can use it for trees, and I've also seen a row of houses whose gardens led, something like that. That was also in the dictionary. So whose can refer to things. It's a pronoun which can refer to things, not only people. Okay, a lot of people think that these ones you can only use with a singular verb. And this is not such a bad misconception, because in academic English, you really ought to use a singular verb. So if you have this misconception, you're just thinking academically. However, if you read what Oxford say about this, they actually say that both of them are possible, but the singular verb is more common in formal written contexts. In other words, the singular verb is the academically correct way of saying the sentence. And so if you want to be correct in an academic setting, please use a singular verb. This is not a misconception then. So remember, either or neither. Oh, by the way, it's either of really, which is important, but either A or B would be is, of course. It would always be a singular verb here. But if you've got an of them, use the singular verb for any of these ones. And one more thing I'll quickly say about subject-verb agreement. If you've got the price of cigarettes, for example, you've got a singular noun here and a plural noun here. the price of cigarettes, the subject of the verb is, of course, the singular noun here. So it's the price which is increasing. It's not the cigarettes which are increasing. The price of cigarettes is increasing. So please use a singular verb if you've got a singular noun here with this noun of noun. But I can think of one exception to that rule, and it's when we use a relative pronoun, a defining relative pronoun like that. If we say he is one of the children that, the subject of the verb, a lot of students think, oh, it must be one, we must need a singular verb, and so we use goes, yeah? Unfortunately not. The subject of the verb is the relative pronoun that, and that is modifying children, and not one. It's modifying they, it's modifying children, and so really, that one's wrong, and you've got to use that one here. So I just thought I'd include that as a noun of noun, where it's singular of plural, but the plural noun actually modifies the verb. And it's because we've got a defining relative clause. Okay, I hope that's all clear. Please put any questions or comments under the video. I'll be very pleased to answer them all. And thanks very much for everyone's attention. I hope you'll all come back very soon, and I hope you all click on the like button. Thanks a lot.